Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this new museumexpert.org webinar. We're really enjoying having you with us for these important conversations for our field. We all are very familiar with Zoom now, so there is not a lot of logistics that I want to share with you, but be aware that this session is recorded as usual. And in a couple of days, you will be able to go there and watch it again, either on our website or on our YouTube channel. So thanks again for being here with us, and thanks a lot to AAM, of course, because we are benefiting again from the support, from the technical support with the Zoom platform, and also from their promotion of this event through social media. So thanks again to AAM for that. This session today is a follow-up session about the value of museums that we had with John Falk earlier a couple of months ago. And so we expect it to be a little bit shorter today, and what we do not expect to have much time for Q&A today, but what we suggest is that you chat and ask questions and make remarks in the chat box, because there is going to be follow-up on this even more. You will see in the coming weeks announcements that go in that sense, and we will announce two new sessions, more workshop type of sessions that are really focusing on your personal views or experiences with this issue of well-being, and in particular of well-being of staff in museums. So make sure that your remarks are in the chat. We really will appreciate that. If we have time at the end, we will have a couple of questions maybe, but we cannot promise that we will go there. So again, there will be follow-up, more in workshop style and more interactive, where we'll be able to not only answer the questions, but hear also about testimonies from people about their experiences in museums and how they experience well-being or not. So this being said, we have today two speakers to address that issue of well-being of staff. And the first is, of course, John Falk. 2 days ago, I would have presented him as the director or CEO of the Institute of Learning Innovation. And today, I cannot do that. There have been some changes. So this is an historical moment. It's the first time in, I don't know how many years or decades, John, that you are in charge of ILI in a different capacity. You are now principal researcher and founder of ILI. Can you tell us a little bit what's the reason for that?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say I'm delighted to announce that ILI has a new CEO. Kippen de Alba-Chu is our new CEO. And I should hasten to add that for those who might be concerned, and maybe for those who are rooting for this, it wasn't because everybody got angry with me and kicked me out. But you know, there comes a time in every organization where the organization needs to move on from the founder. And so I initiated a process 5 years ago with the board and staff to begin a process of finding a successor. And I'm delighted and proud of both board and staff for moving forward and strategically thinking through how to do this, and in fact, implementing this. And so we went through a search process and involved everybody in that. And again, without belaboring the point, we were happy to select Kippen as the next CEO. I will be working with Kippen in transition over the next months and maybe years, and I will continue to be working at ILI as a principal researcher in support of the larger goals and mission of our organization.
Thanks for that, and we are all looking forward to what the future will bring for this organization. Thank you so much. So you are our first speaker, and then the second one is Judy Koke. She is the deputy director at ILI, and so she knows very well your work, and you have been dialoguing about that so many times, I know. So I'm I'm delighted to hand over to you, Judy, reminding people that for those who have were there the last time when John spoke about this book, about the value of museums and the role and how they were creating, I'd say, well-being for society. At the end of that session, I asked him, that's true. You know, we now understand about the well-being that museum creates for society. But what about the well-being of their staff? And John was a little bit surprised by the question. and then we agreed that we were thinking about this and that has been going on for the last months, and John has been thinking about that and how to answer that question. And that's why we are here today. And so Judy, I'm happy to hand it over to you now, and I will disappear and leave the floor to both of you to have a dialogue about that topic, and we'll see you at the end.
Well, thank you so much, Walter. And it certainly has been a pleasure speaking with a museum expert and planning this conversation today, because this is a new application of the work that John's been thinking very deeply about, sort of a new lens to think about it through. And so we wanted to start by asking you to take a moment and think about the things at your workplace, about your work, that challenge or support your sense of satisfaction or fulfillment at work. So you can just pop those into the chat, and we'll take just 1 minute, 60 seconds. So think about some of the things that really support you and things that really challenge your sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. And then we'll jump into the conversation. And I'll say while you're entering them that both the comments, your thoughts, and questions in the chat will be saved, and the group designing the next workshop to think about workplace well-being will certainly use all of this information to shape that. So sadly, I'm in the situation where I can't actually see the chat. I think only Colleen some museum expert can see the chat. So I'm gonna trust that that there are lots of interesting thoughts and ideas happening in the chat. And meanwhile,
Judy, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you? There seems to be an issue with chat where it doesn't, I don't think it's working. I'm going to try and play with it, but just continue. Let me see if I can figure it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to start, although John did a full workshop presentation webinar on the value of museums, I'm sure not everybody could be there. So John's going to start with a brief review of the concepts and the definition of well-being that will support the rest of our conversation. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, so the backstory is this. So I was really trying to think about how can we define and describe to the larger world, as well as our own community, the value of museums. And as I studied my own data and that of others about why people go to museums, and particularly how they describe the value they derive from these experiences, well, it was clear that people had lots of reasons for going to museums, and they described the benefits of those experiences in multiple ways. And perhaps not surprisingly, there were lots of various researchers who interpreted those results in lots of different ways. But ultimately, I felt that out of all these many reasons, all this data, it all led back to a single idea, the idea that at the most fundamental level, the reason people visit places like museum and the primary benefits they derive as a consequence of those experiences all had to do with the enhancement of their well-being. Of course, then I have to say what I mean by well-being. And I need to be clear that how I define well-being is not always the same. It's a little different than the way many people do today. And frankly, it's a little alarming, I find, that today the idea of well-being has become almost a pop psychology term and has become synonymous with happiness or wellness. And although those are definitely aspects of well-being, they aren't really well-being. Well-being, again, as I define it, is first and foremost a biological construct rather than merely a psychological idea. And again, unlike the way it's mostly described as this exclusively human phenomenon, and particularly this notion of well-being about self-actualization and attainment, is problematic because actually well-being is a basic quality of what it means to be alive, and not just to be alive as a human, but to be alive, whether you're a bacterium, an oak tree, a raccoon, or a person. In fact, I've gone so far as to say that the ability to perceive and act upon perceptions of well-being is what distinguishes living from non-living things. But at its core, well-being is about achieving balance. Being in balance feels good. Being out of balance feels bad. And we can intuitively perceive, even if we have trouble describing these, we can intuitively feel when we feel healthy, when we feel secure, when we feel vital, when we feel loved, when we feel full and satiated. And we can also feel when we have are not feeling those things, when we're feeling out of balance, when we're feeling sick or lonely or hungry, depressed or inadequate or whatever. And those feelings are really important because what they allow us to do is to perceive something that is fundamentally important, but is actually very difficult to perceive, and that is our fitness, our ability to survive. Because over evolutionary time, all living things have these feelings, and those feelings correlate with enhanced fitness, in the case of positive well-being, or negative fitness, as it were, in the case of negative well-being. So when you're feeling sick, that's not a good thing, because if you continue to feel sick, your chances of survival are diminished. On the other hand, if you're feeling appreciated and loved, and surrounded by people who appreciate and love you, actually that correlates again with cultural and biological fitness if you're a human. So all that's great, but the other big issue that's important to keep in mind is all these feelings, whether they're positive feelings or negative feelings, are basically ephemeral. Well-being is not a state that we can achieve. It's not that we can climb to the top of the mountain and achieve nirvana, and then we're forever there. It's constantly in flux. So I feel healthy today, but that's no guarantee I'll be healthy tomorrow. I ate a full meal yesterday, but I'm hungry again today. I feel loved and appreciated right now, but that doesn't mean that I won't get in an argument with my boss tomorrow, later this afternoon. And therefore, all of my sense of security, for example, in the workplace, comes crashing down. And so we're constantly in this process of striving to maintain those feelings of positive well-being and damp down, or to the extent that we can avoid, those negative feelings of well-being. Well, turns out over evolutionary time, people have evolved tens of thousands of ways to monitor and control their well-being. And the interesting thing is that all of these can be broadly categorized as falling into four basic domains of well-being, if you will. What I've called personal, intellectual, social, and physical well-being. And it turns out that, as I describe in my book, the value of museums, museum experience support all of these 4 areas. And as we'll talk about further this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are, this evening, depending on where you are, turns out all these 4 areas equally apply, but in different ways to the workplace. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about these 4 areas. So personal well-being, and I'll again frame these currently in the museum context, sort of the museum experience context. But again, as we talk further, we'll reframe them in terms of the workplace. So personal well-being, museums catalyze wonder, interest, curiosity, all of which foster a sense of power, personal power and identity. And they also foster a greater sense of personal connectedness, appreciation, belonging, harmony with the human and natural world. And go figure, we all find these fun and enjoyable. We like looking at beautiful art. We like admiring waterfalls. That gives us pleasure. And it also enhances our sense of well-being. Intellectual well-being. Museums support people's need to have choice and control over their world. They help people more clearly comprehend how their past knowledge and understandings, as well as the things they've done, connect to things in the future. So they can actually have some agency over what happens in the future. They can serve as a guide to better informed and creative future. Social well-being. Well, humans are fundamentally social creatures, and we like to spend our time with other people, and we spend our time in museums for just that reason. We like to have a sense of belonging to family, group, and even community. And again, museums experiences have the potential, and in many cases, they actually do support that sense of belonging and association with family and community. And then finally, even though in the 21st century we live in air-conditioned spaces and we are well-fed and well-clothed, we all, like all creatures, are concerned about the basics of life, being comfortable in a comfortable temperature, being secure and safe and free from disease. And historically, museums have been places that supported that kind of sense, both physically and virtually, of being in a safe place where you can explore and play and enjoy without fear or anxiety. So thus, both theoretically and empirically, I've now been able to demonstrate that people do indeed derive these enhanced feelings of well-being when they go to museums. And the amazing and wonderful thing is that those feelings persist not merely for hours, not merely while people are there, but typically for days and sometimes even months, years, or even decades. And all of that is reflective of the value, the well-being related value that places like museums derive. But what we're going to talk about today is not just going to museums. Actually, work turns out to be a place that gives us a lot of feeling of value. And for the same reasons, work supports our sense of intellectual, personal, social, and physical well-being. So, Judy.
Yeah, so the purpose of today's conversation is really a bit of an experiment and thinking about how this model can help us think about our own well-being when it comes to work and the people we manage, the teams of people that work for us. How can we create spaces and environments that are supportive of people, and starting to think about starting with thinking about physical well-being, there have been a number of comments in the chat about employers supporting our mental health. There have been conversations about the relationship between pay, which depending on the museum environment you're in is sometimes a big challenge, and its relationship with inflation in our society. And then also we know that our staff and often ourselves, we're weary coming out of a number of years of uncertainty and pandemic and dealing with kids at home. We're a physically weary group of people still trying to do our best. So when we start thinking about physical well-being, John, do you want to talk a little bit about some dots that you can connect?
Sure. So, like anything else, we humans don't like to put ourselves in places where we feel physically threatened. So in order for us to feel like we're in a satisfying workplace, our workplace has to feel safe and secure. An interesting connection to this is being able to work at home virtually. And we don't often think consciously about this, but one of the things that defines our homes typically are the place we most feel physically safe and secure. We feel a great deal of control over, once we get home, we close that door, we're not feeling threatened there. And again, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but one of the reasons people don't want to go back to the workplace is they hate commuting. And commuting is really stressful mentally, but actually it's probably the most unsafe time of your entire workday if you're a pencil neck geek like most museum workers. Being in a car for an hour in traffic is fundamentally unsafe. It significantly increases the risk of personal injury. And so physical health is really important. And again, it's often unconscious, but it's an unconscious belief that we have that we need to be in a place that is, again, physically healthy, that we're not going to get sick, we're not going to get injured in this space. And of course, mental health is equally important. As you say, we don't want to be in a place where we feel stressed, threatened, or any of those kinds of things. And then the reason most of us work, and although we don't, again, spend a lot of time thinking about this, is we live in a society where our ability to put food on the table, to have a roof over our head, put clothing on our back, and some measure of security in terms of our health and well-being, in terms of insurance and all that stuff, is directly tied to employment. So if we don't feel like we're making a livable wage, then our workplace is not supporting our physical well-being.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think a lot too about how we can talk about our work environments being toxic at times, and usually we mean not physical, we mean perhaps emotional, or but I also feel that this is a moment where perhaps employers are more willing to consider the purchase of, say, noise canceling headphones for people working in open spaces. When we transitioned to a large open space rather than individual offices in 2008 at the Art Gallery of Ontario, it's such a different working environment, and staff members asked for things. It was also, of course, a windowless room, so happy lights, noise canceling headphones, and it was a struggle to get approval for those things in a way that I hope it isn't today. So this discussion of physical well-being brings me to think next about personal well-being. And again, in the comments, people are talking about the Great Resignation. They've been talking about working. Some of the things that support personal well-being is the support to be really creative in their roles, to be working with like-minded people who share your values and your passion, and to do work that actually does align with those personal values. So the problem is with this Great Resignation, all of us are often either looking for work or in a job that's asking us to do much more with much less. And so thinking about the workplace and that personal connection that really catalyzes our ongoing sense of identity. How do we think about the dots between your model on well-being and our personal well-being?
Yeah. So a lot of what personal well-being, as you say, Judy, is about identity. And particularly as professionals, a lot of people's identities are tied up to their jobs. And, we live in a society where when we bump into people on the street or meet them at a party, one of the first things they ask is, what do you do? And unlike in some cultures, in the US at least, they're not talking about what we do in our free time. They're actually literally talking about what we do for work. And so having a job that we can define as tied in with who we perceive us to be is really important. And as a consequence, we want to believe that the work we do connects to our lived experience, to the expertise we've gained in life, that these are significant, and that the acquired skills and knowledge that we possess are really important in defining what we do during our work time, because we spend so much time at work. And we have to do work that we feel reinforces and supports that sense of identity. We may feel like, we're really a creative person, but if our work never allows us to be creative, that doesn't support our sense of identity. And it's not even sufficient in terms of personal identity just to be employed in a job that's consistent with one's identity. One also needs to believe that one is part of an organization that respects and values those skills and expertise, that what one does is important to the success of the organization. Because in a sense, being part of an organization is also identity. It's a larger sense of self. Our self is not merely who we are as an individual. Our sense is also defined by our family, by our friends, and by the place where we work. So as I'll talk about shortly, the organization needs to acknowledge and respect that contribution for us to feel identity with them. And as you said, as a species, we take great pleasure in being creative. And so workplaces need to support, or even better, encourage creativity. And then the other thing that, again, we don't often talk about, that as a species, people also crave novelty. And research has shown that satisfaction with any situation is enhanced by moderate novelty. And that includes the workplace. So we don't like doing the same things over and over again, or feeling so constrained by the demands that we can't afford to think or experiment with new approaches. And so one of the reasons that I guess that a lot of people are resigning has a lot to do with that latter notion. Because when one's forced to do more than one can reasonably do, it squeezes out not only the joy of the work, but also the ability to feel empowered to play, experiment, create. Because who's got time for that stuff if you're crushed with responsibilities? But without these, there's no joy in work. no sense of personal well-being.
I agree with that. I think that those are so tightly connected, that sense of weariness and that sense of being able to really, the weariness of the physical well-being, but also that there's an emotional weariness that comes with just not being able to do your best work. You know, you can do a better job if you had the ability. There was a comment in the chat that fits into this category really well. Somebody mentioned that working at home and building a remote community has actually increased, the observation was it's increased the sense of trust between the employer and the individual. And I really wanted to elaborate on that comment, having spent the last week as deputy director trying to connect staff with our new CEO and explain people's roles and how we work and the different talents that people bring to our organization. Each of them has talked about our work schedule. So because we're not front facing, we don't deal with visitors and work in specific office hours. Our salary is based on deliverables, on getting things done. You commit to getting a certain amount of work done. And if you want to do that from 11 o'clock at night till 4 o'clock in the morning, like one of our staff members, that's just fine. It's about working when you need to work. There is a expectation that you participate in important meetings, of course, but there's a lot of autonomy and flexibility, and an equal accountability on the other side of that people have really embraced and feel is a real strength of our organization. And so that obviously can't work for everybody, although there can also be more or less. There's allowing people to work at home some days and in the office some days. But I thought the comment on trust was a really important one when we're talking about personal well-being. And it really connects to social well-being. And it seems to me that now more than ever, having a really clear sense of shared mission and how my job drives or contributes to that mission, what my contribution to the success of our work is. I think that that's a really important part of social well-being. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would absolutely agree, but I don't think that's the whole picture. So yeah, it's critically important to be feel a part of the workplace, a sense of belonging, that you feel like you're part of that larger whole. Because as I said, we have essentially these multiple levels of identity. As I said, we have our own individual sense of identity, but we have identity as being part of a family, identity as being part of a group of friends and associates, but we have identities with our work. We have our identities, many people with sports teams, or identity with hobby groups, identity with political parties and countries. So there are multiple levels of which we can have a sense of identity, and feeling a part of that larger whole that is our workplace is really important. But interestingly enough, that's only part of it. Actually, the workplace is really an important place for building social relationships, for making friends, where one feels like one has coworkers who care about them. And much as we hope that our family and friends care about us, we hope that our coworkers care about us. None of us want to feel like we're just cogs in a large organizational machine, but we want to be perceived as individuals, and not only individuals where people care about us, but ultimately individuals within this larger organization that people depend on, that people appreciate, and therefore this whole notion of esteem and respect is important, that we need to feel acknowledged and rewarded for the work we do. And probably, in many sort of corporate workplaces, and particularly hourly workplaces. There's employee of the week and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, that's can be sort of a cheesy way of acknowledging the value that people have. But to be honest, we need to feel like not only that our boss believes that we're important, that our coworkers feel that we're important, and that ultimately everybody in the organization acknowledges and understands that everybody in this place actually has a role to play, and an important role in the success of the organization. And a workplace without these kinds of continuous social interactions, be they at the individual level or the group level, is less than satisfying place to work. And to be honest, this is the downside of the virtual workplace. Yeah. And although working at home significantly enhances, arguably, our sense of physical well-being, for all the reasons we talked about, it can actually detract from our sense of social well-being. So there are trade-offs there.
Yeah, and I'd build on that. I work, my work takes me into connections with a lot of different museums, and I find when I talk with younger staff, with new staff, people who are new to museums or new to that museum, we have some younger staff who've come aboard in the past 2 years. The downside of at home is that being part of a culture in person where you overhear someone else handling a difficult client on the telephone, or you hear two people who've been doing this longer than you problem solving a research methodology or whatever. And so the learning, how do we, thinking about how we continue to support learning, particularly in times when budgets are so tight that professional development can be the first thing that gets lopped off the list. So thinking about intellectual well-being, John, you talked about novelty and things being intellectually stimulating. As the leader too of ILI, have you got thoughts about how to keep workspaces intellectually stimulating?
Well, the key to that is, first of all, again, built into the DNA of humans is the desire to have choice and control, to have agency. We don't like to be in situations, particularly well-educated people who've invested a lot of time and energy in developing expertise. We like to be able to be trusted. That comes back to trust. We like to be able to have the ability to make decisions and to exercise those intellectual muscles in our work. And when we're deprived of that, we're deprived of the ability to solve the challenges that our jobs were designed to solve. That makes work less than satisfactory. And I mean, the reality is all of us in this museum profession, we came to this job because we wanted to solve problems. We see this as an opportunity to proactively do good things in the world. And so we have to be allowed to solve those problems. We have to have the support to be able to think about these and learn. I mean, as knowledge workers, as creatives, we need to have the ability to apply that knowledge, to apply that creativity to the challenges that we came to work to do. And when we're deprived of that, that makes for a less than satisfactory workplace. But when we are allowed to do that, we find work very satisfying, very satisfying. And But the other thing that relates to choice and control, more to the control part than the choice, is all of us value some measure of predictability in our lives. Too much choice is also a problem.
Too much uncertainty.
Too much uncertainty is a problem. And it's hard to feel like one has a measure of control over one's life when one's work is in a totally unpredictable and unstable environment. Yeah. And so if we are in workplaces that feel unpredictable, that feel unstable, that damps down our sense of satisfaction and pleasure in being in those spaces.
One of the things I've had to think about a lot recently is how to continue to support a staff who are lifelong learners and just love to learn new things. Again, on a shoestring. And one of the things I came to realize is that when we think about professional development, we tend to default to taking courses or going to conferences, or somehow or other it exists outside our organization, right? Bringing in somebody who has some sort of specialized knowledge into our circle. And one of the things we've been working on both in FLAME, which is the Forum for Leadership in Art Museum Education, or internally at the Institute is what can we learn from each other? There are such surprising deposits of expertise just among ourselves, and in raising that and making that visible and using those pockets of expertise to support that need to learn and explore new ideas, we're also celebrating people and supporting that social well-being at the same time. So that's one of the things that we've been thinking about. So we want to shift for just a moment, because we've all been thinking about well-being, both our own and our staff's, but we really tried to unpack it today into these categories to broaden our definition and think of the term more expansively. And I'm wondering if we could use the chat now for just a few minutes to think about something we could do tomorrow, something that I know you're going to have a workshop where strategies are developed, but there are also some easier things that are that we can incorporate into what we do on a daily basis, having taken some time out of busy days to think about well-being. And I wonder if we could just take a minute or two, please, in this very rich conversation that's happening in the chat, and throw in some ideas of things that you think you might be able to do to contribute to well-being, your own or your department's. On very limited budgets, that's right. But that's also not necessarily new. Yeah. So touching base with staff, I agree with that a lot. I find myself asking more about people's families and children than I used to when I check in. Peer learning, Lori's talking about peer learning, and a really great way to find really practical and very relevant to your situation, to your knowledge. Oh, Allison's talking about starting off the day with a morning huddle. So that could be a combination of check-in and celebration, and getting everybody reinforcing that that shared work and shared goals. So I think that's a really nice idea. So some really great suggestions here. So Colleen, I think we have about 10 minutes or so if there were some questions that came in that you would like us to speak to.
Well, a couple of questions, obviously a very active chat. So thank you everyone for being patient with me as I got chat up and running. So this might be really specific, but we had a question around a museum that had a break-in recently, and there's a sense of feeling safe in the workplace without a whole lot of a budget to actually make things more secure. Maybe there could be some tips, or if anyone has suggestions about how to make your physical safety feel like you're a little bit more in control, or things you can do to increase physical safety, which then of course adds to your physical well-being.
I'm going to bet that there are people out there in the audience who have better answers to that than I can have. I mean, I will say that we all feel physically secure until we don't. You know, nothing undermines our sense of physical security like having somebody mug us or having a break-in or things like that. And those degradations, as it were, of our sense of security take a lot of time to repair. And again, it's as much mental as it is physical, in the sense that, you know, you can build walls, you can build better doors and better locks, but that doesn't mean that you're going to feel secure. So again, I would think that the solution is as much a social solution as it is a physical solution, and it is it is about how, as a organization, how as a community, you can work to ensure greater physical security.
I think too, it underscores the importance of a shared workspace, and how oftentimes, well, that's the security people's problem, and there isn't, I think, some really strong communication around how did it come to be that we were vulnerable in this space, and what are we going to do in response to that vulnerability, and has anybody thought through this on a larger scale? So it becomes even more important for us to come out of our silos and really communicate, because it's a shared space, right? Our office spaces are shared spaces.
Yeah, and actually the place where we're actually, as a collective, we are most vulnerable these days is not our physical spaces, it's our virtual spaces. And all of us, I included, often are far too cavalier and naive about that kind of digital security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ruth said that where she worked, and I'm sorry, it went by me so quickly I couldn't see, but at one point they actually did for the front desk have, probably because there's money there, panic buttons or SOS buttons that made helped make staff feel safer, that somebody would at least come and help if there was a moment when help was needed. Yeah.
Well, so I think this kind of feeds into, and this is just a theme I'm seeing through the chat, is for a variety of reasons, emotional exhaustion, especially the last couple of years, but I think most people would agree that museum staff has been feeling this for a while.
Yeah.
And you know, as museum workers, we tend to connect our sense of self and our identity so strongly to our positions. How can we connect, you know, productivity and goals in a way that helps leadership see that this is an area of professional development worth supporting?
So that that your staff deserve professional development. So,
well, and around, you know, mental health strategies,
I see.
Alleviating the emotional exhaustion that comes from working in a museum. And of course, we're all taking on more roles and more positions and doing more, which just, you know, exponentially increases the rate of emotional exhaustion, right?
Yes, yes. And when someone leaves, we end up doing their job even without necessarily having the expertise in that area. Everybody just sort of bands together and makes it work. And you're right. Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm biased, but my biased answer to that is that I think this framing that we've just been talking about, as seeing the workplace from this more holistic perspective and appreciating that satisfaction and productivity, and however you want to define it in the workplace, is a multi-dimensional but manageable construct. And that by appreciating that employees, the satisfaction of employees and the productivity of the employees is a function of their, dare I say, their personal, intellectual, social, and physical well-being, is a message for administrators that would allow them to begin to more strategically think about how to create satisfying, healthy, and productive workplaces, as opposed to narrowly seeing it as, okay, so how do we got visitors coming in, what do we do with the visitors? Or however you narrowly define the problem, that is unduly narrowly defining what the problem space is. And so I'd like to think that what we've been talking about today opens up that problem space in a way that can lead to more productive solutions.
I think too, the emphasis, there's been more conversations about the work we do on behalf of our visitors, creating opportunities, but that work be trauma informed. And I think that this is language that we're becoming more comfortable with, and ideas that we're becoming more familiar with. And I feel that I've seen a difference in how openly people can talk about their mental health in a work environment. And I hope that's true for most people. I know it's not quite yet, but there's definitely a societal change that is now being reflected in the workplace. And so I think too, with a number of museums becoming unionized, museums having great struggles with retention of employees, I think we're going to have to position this work around creating healthy, supportive environments for our employees and our staff as essential to our ability to reach our mission. So
Absolutely.
Walter.
I think at this point, yes, we're going to turn it back over to Walter. We so appreciate your time. Walter, you want to take us out?
Yeah, but I tend to take benefit of the position that I have to ask a question, a follow-up question to what has been said. Really have appreciated the conversation and the chat so far. But we have done a sort of a workshop in Boston, and one with people that were at the AAM conference about these topics. And one of the elements that came out of that was that one of the frustrations was most people who wanted to be part of the conversation about the future of their institution, and they did not feel trusted by their leadership to do so. So my question to you is, what are the obstacles that the leadership see to involve people like that into the conversation about the future? Why does that not happen?
Well, I would suggest that maybe it reflects their own perception of choice and control, that somehow this allowing that kind of input threatens their perception of control, their perception of ownership, their own sense of, I would argue, misplaced sense of identity with their role and their responsibility in the organization, and a lack of ability to see the organization as a, to be honest, larger, more complex organism than they give it credit for. It's a very industrial age model. It's a very hierarchical top-down model, as opposed to thinking that we're all here trying, that using a cellular model, that it's privileging the brain, as it were, over the feet, as if, as if the feet aren't important to your health and well-being, that the brain is somehow more important. Well, guess what? It's not. Your feet, your stomach, your liver, they're all equally important to your long-term health and viability. And so privileging one aspect of the organism over the other is bad science and bad management.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John and Judy, for taking on this challenge that we have thrown to you about this question that actually was not asked before, but that it's really living in the community right now. We really feel that from all the connections that we have with museum people in the community that we are creating, it is that there is really an issue here about well-being. And so thanks for stepping out of your normal role and
Sure.
taking up some short-term type of research and thinking to answer that question and really putting us on a track for more conversation and research on that. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So to end this, again, thanks to AM for supporting us and reminding you two things, is everybody here. Look forward to announcement of the coming workshops and that will be really related to the topic that we discussed today. And the first of this workshop is going to really address the global issue of well-being that is known now as the burnout in the museums. People really refer to that as the burnout. What are all the elements of the burnout that we can see today? And we're going to have hopefully a group from people that are here and others to come up with personal experiences about that, so that we can define all the elements of what the burnout is and start a conversation about that. And then the one after that, we will actually try to discuss how can you stand up for yourself in a situation like that, if you feel you are disrespected, not trusted, not recognized, that you cannot give the whole full potential about your or in your position. How do you do that in your museum? So that we think that these are very important conversations to have. So this is very important. Look forward to that through our newsletter. And the second is we are a group of volunteers, and thanks Colleen and Rita for helping preparing this, and thanks to our newsletter and marketing team for promoting all this to make this a successful webinar again. And don't hesitate, click the button to support us, because we really need that. Thank you so much, and we see you next time. Bye.